He was laughing softly when I turned the key and stepped inside the practice room, his fingers still dancing over the final note like he wasn't ready to let go of it. Like music had to fade out through skin rather than stop with silence. I paused by the door without speaking, listening to the echo of the note settle against the walls, then closed it quietly behind me. The room was too warm, the light too soft for the time of day, and for a split second I had the eerie sense that something irreversible had already taken place here, even though no one had moved. It was the way he looked at me, like he'd been waiting. The girl, his girlfriend, though no one ever used that word out loud, was the one who interrupted the illusion. She stepped through the back door with a notebook in hand and stopped immediately when she saw us, though nothing explicit had happened yet. Her presence was quiet but not subtle. She was always early, always organized, always pretending not to notice the tension between me and him, though of course she noticed everything. She asked the question with her eyes before she said it aloud, and when she did speak, her voice cracked with something that almost sounded like pity. "You two, how long has this been going on?" The air in the room shifted instantly, like someone had thrown open a window in the middle of winter. My hands were at my sides, one still slightly curled from having turned a page in the score just moments earlier, and I wasn't ready to answer anything. He looked at me first, not at her, and the way he waited for me to speak made my stomach clench. Was he going to let me lie? I could have denied it, could have smiled coolly and said she was imagining things, but instead I said nothing, and my silence screamed. I think she heard it louder than anything else. It was too soon to fall apart, and yet here I was, standing in the very place where it had started, trying to remember how I'd ever let it begin. When he first arrived, it wasn't attraction that caught me off guard. It was recognition. He was so brash, so certain, as if the entire world owed him something. But beneath that sharpness, I sensed a deep and deliberate ache. He played like someone trying to be understood, not admired, and I knew that feeling all too well. I watched his hands move across the strings that first day, his posture unpolished but strangely compelling. And I remember thinking, without realizing I'd thought it, he doesn't belong to her. What a terrible thing to admit, even to myself. The lesson that changed everything started the same way as any other. He had brought me a new arrangement, overly dramatic and unnecessarily difficult, but I humored him, knowing it wasn't about the piece itself, but about proving something. We sat close, our knees nearly touching at the bench, and I asked him to slow the tempo. His elbow brushed my side as he adjusted the sheet. We laughed about something. I can't recall what. And then his hand landed on the back of mine without thought or hesitation. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a request. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, and he looked back. Not shy, but sure. And that's when I leaned in. I didn't plan to. God, I wish I had. I meant to kiss his temple, something brief and harmless, something that could pass for maternal, professional, appropriate, anything but what it truly was. But he turned and my lips met the corner of his mouth, and in that instant everything shifted, like I had stepped over a line I couldn't even see until it was behind me. Do you think you'd stop yourself if it were you? Really stop, knowing what it might awaken? The moment broke as suddenly as it had formed. He didn't pull away, but I did, standing so abruptly the bench scraped against the wood floor. My heart was hammering, my hands damp, and he was just sitting there, watching me with a strange stillness, like he hadn't decided yet if what had happened meant something or nothing at all. I pretended it hadn't happened. I made tea in the faculty lounge and deleted the calendar entry for his next session. I told myself I'd correct it, get ahead of it, if I acted quickly enough. But 2 days later, he texted me a picture of a vintage score, saying he'd found it in a secondhand shop and thought of me. Beneath the image were the words, "If you want to finish what we started, I'll be there tonight." I didn't reply. I stared at the message for 20 minutes while the kettle boiled and forgot to make the tea. The kiss with my ex-husband happened that same evening. He had arrived unannounced, bringing me an old box of letters I'd asked him to return. We talked about a concert we'd once attended together, how it had rained afterward and we'd taken shelter under the theater's stone archway. There was a moment, one of those long, nostalgic silences, and I stepped toward him, maybe searching for some anchor to remind me of who I used to be. He kissed me then, soft and automatic, the way you kiss someone you once loved and no longer recognize. It was supposed to reassure me. Instead, it confirmed just how far I'd drifted. That night, I went back to the practice room alone. The key in the lock felt heavier than usual, like it knew what I was bringing with me. I sat at the piano and placed my hands on the keys, but nothing came. No music, no clarity. Just that dizzy sense of standing in a place I'd once called sacred, knowing full well I was the one who'd profaned it. And you, hearing this now, are probably wondering what I'm hoping to achieve by telling you all this. Do I want sympathy? Forgiveness? I just want you to understand how easily it can happen. How even the most careful life can shift course in a moment so quiet you don't even hear it pass. So now you know the beginning. And maybe, like me, you're already dreading the end. I told myself I wouldn't see him again. Not like that. Not alone. Not in that room where even the air had started to feel complicit. But the following week, he stood in the hallway outside my studio as if the last time we were together hadn't been an accident at all. He didn't knock. He waited until the hallway emptied, then stepped inside without a word, holding a weathered folder of sonatas against his chest like it was a peace offering or maybe a dare. It was neither. It was bait, and I took it. I gestured toward the piano without speaking and watched him walk across the room. Calm, confident, a little too familiar. He was dressed the way he always was. Shirt rolled at the sleeves, jeans faded at the knees, a loose bag slung over one shoulder. But I noticed him more now, or maybe just differently. He sat beside me, brushing invisible dust from the sheet before opening it, then angled it slightly in my direction without asking if I wanted to see. As if we were a team, as if there were no damage to undo. He placed his fingers on the strings and began to tune with practiced ease, barely looking at me. I sat stiffly, hands folded in my lap, pretending not to notice how close he was. "I've rewritten the phrasing," he said finally. I wanted to feel less careful this time. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine, and lingered a second too long. Less careful? What a precise way to describe the mess we were already in. We played. Not well. My mind was too fractured for precision. But we played. And something in the tempo betrayed me. He noticed. Of course he did. He adjusted to me instantly, softened the edges of the run, let me lead for a few bars, then took over again with a playful insistence. At one point, he laughed softly, not at the music, but at the fact that we were pretending to be normal. "You're tense," he said under his breath. I nodded once. He waited a moment, then added, "You don't need to be." I wish that had helped. I really do. Afterward, I didn't ask him to stay, but I didn't ask him to leave either. He packed up slowly, deliberately, letting silence swell around us like steam from a pot. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a thermos. "I made too much tea this morning," he said, unscrewing the lid with a casual smile. "You always take it with honey, right?" My breath caught for just a second. That was something I'd mentioned once, offhandedly, while searching for a spoon. And now here he was, pouring it into a chipped mug I kept in the back of the drawer, the one no student had ever touched. I should have said no. I should have walked him to the door. Instead, I accepted the mug and took a sip. Too hot. I burned the tip of my tongue and didn't flinch. He laughed again, gentle, amused, and I could feel the trap closing. Not because he was trying to manipulate me, but because I was already leaning into it willingly. Maybe that's the worst part of all this. The knowing. I saw her, his girlfriend, that same afternoon. She stopped by the faculty lounge while I was gathering a few scores, her tone light but her eyes too focused. "Have you noticed he's different lately?" she asked, stirring her coffee with a plastic stick she didn't seem to need. Like he's performing even when he isn't playing. I gave her a half smile, the kind that disappears too quickly, and made some comment about maturity and stress. She watched me carefully. He says your lessons are the highlight of his week. I didn't respond. What could I say? That evening, I went to the cafe around the corner, the one I used to visit every Saturday before everything shifted. I sat at the corner table with my coat still on and a scarf loosely knotted around my neck, even though the heating made the room too warm. A pair of younger women sat behind me, their voices too loud, talking about some new rumors circling the performance students. One of them laughed and said, "You'd have to be deaf not to see it. He's obsessed with her." The other said, "She's old enough to be his mother." I left before I finished my drink. The scarf stayed on. That night, when I came home, my ex-husband's name lit up on my phone screen. I let it ring until it stopped. He'd been reaching out more frequently since the kiss. Short, polite messages, as if he wasn't sure whether to re-enter my life or simply acknowledge its collapse. I kept meaning to respond. I never did. The next morning, I opened the studio door and found the room different. He'd left a note folded inside the sheet music. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even personal. It just said, "Tomorrow. Same time?" I stood there for a long time, the note pressed between my fingers. Then I placed it in my pocket and sat down at the bench, but my hands wouldn't move. I asked myself, quietly, guiltily, if I missed the music or him. The answer didn't come right away. Maybe it still hasn't. I had planned to cancel. I even wrote the message. Something polite, something evasive about rescheduling due to faculty deadlines. But I didn't send it. Not because I forgot. Because I hesitated. 1 minute too long. And once again, I found myself walking toward that room like it still belonged to me. It didn't. Not anymore. I passed the glass wall of the practice corridor and saw him already inside, bow in hand, jacket on the back of the chair, eyes flicking down at the page and then immediately back up as I approached. He always watched me arrive. Always. That was the first warning sign I ignored. I opened the door slowly, as though the pace might make the space less charged, less intimate, less known. He greeted me with a half smile, leaned slightly to the side to adjust the stand, and said without looking directly at me, "I reworked the middle section like you suggested." He tapped the paper. "I want you to hear it this way." The room felt warmer than usual, probably because I hadn't removed my coat yet, but also because the walls themselves seemed to listen now. As he played, I didn't watch his fingers. I watched his jaw, the way it tensed at certain intervals, the way his chest moved slightly with every shift of breath. There was nothing in his posture that read performance anymore. It was invitation, subtle, consistent. I moved toward the piano without speaking and sat on the far end of the bench. He finished the final bar and looked at me for approval. I gave him none. I pressed a few soft chords as reply, letting them ring under his last note, then nodded once. "Again," I said, my voice lower than usual. This time slower. We didn't play like teacher and student that day. We played like people pretending not to remember the last time they touched. He leaned in when he didn't have to, tilted his head just close enough to make me aware of the curve of his neck, and when our hands overlapped above the keys, I didn't pull mine away. I let it stay. That was the moment. You know the one. The second you cross something that can't be uncrossed. I didn't know he was going to lean in. He didn't ask. He just did. And I didn't stop him. He turned his face toward mine and rested one hand against the closed lid of the piano, steadying himself like the room had tilted. He looked into me, not at me. And for the first time, I felt a kind of gravity that had nothing to do with logic. He moved forward. I didn't move back. And when his lips brushed against the side of mine, gently, not demanding but definite, I let it happen. God, I let it happen. Then the door opened. It didn't slam. It didn't creak. It simply opened, softly, deliberately, and there she was. Her bag still on her shoulder, notebook under one arm, keys in the other hand like she'd just stepped in from any ordinary day. But her eyes, those clear, unflinching eyes, froze on us like she'd walked into something she hadn't expected but always suspected. We sprang apart too quickly. That was our second mistake. He stood first, clearing his throat like it might erase the silence. I turned to the side and reached for a score that didn't need moving. She stared without speaking. The light in the room changed, or maybe it just felt darker because no one knew what to say. "Did I interrupt something?" she asked, her voice perfectly calm. No one answered, and that was our third mistake. She stepped forward slowly, set the notebook on the empty chair, and let her eyes pass between us one more time before saying, "You two, how long has this been going on?" I looked at the floor. Not because I was ashamed, because I didn't want to see what was already broken. He didn't speak either. That silence, shared and simultaneous, was the only real confirmation she needed. She left the room without another word. After she was gone, I finally exhaled. He paced once, from the chair to the stand and back, then sat on the edge of the bench beside me, looking down at his hands like they were someone else's. I wanted to say something that could put it back in the box, wrap the moment in plausible deniability. But it was too late. The door had been open. The light had been real. There was no box left. "Do you regret it?" he asked, still looking down. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. Instead, I said nothing. He turned to me then, eyes searching mine for some version of the truth. "You don't have to answer that," he added, and his voice, usually so casual, so loose, was tight now, almost careful. "But I need you to understand. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Neither did I said, and the words felt like water hitting hot iron. A hiss and then nothing. "Maybe you think I'm horrible. Maybe you think I should have never let him come that close. Maybe you're right. But tell me, if someone looked at you like that, if someone made you feel like you mattered again, like you were still visible, could you really turn away?" That evening, I walked home by a longer route, letting the cold settle into my coat sleeves. My hands were numb. My thoughts were louder than they'd ever been. And when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, it felt like a different house. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. My body still held the weight of that almost kiss, and the echo of the question she'd asked was still vibrating somewhere under my skin. At the edge of my kitchen counter lay the envelope I'd forgotten to mail, the one with a letter addressed to the university board, recommending her for a mentorship grant. I picked it up, looked at the name on the front, and placed it gently in the trash. Was that petty? Maybe, but I couldn't send it now. That night, I lay awake and asked myself the only question that still mattered. Did I do it because I was lonely? Or because I was selfish? The answer, unfortunately, was yes. The door to my studio stayed closed the next morning. Not because it had to be, but because I wanted it that way. I kept the blinds down, the light low and the piano untouched. The silence inside was different now. Not restful, not focused, just heavy and reluctant, like the air itself was ashamed of what it had witnessed. I didn't know if he would come back. I didn't know if she had told anyone. All I knew was that something had shifted and nothing could be played the same way again. I sat at my desk pretending to sort scores, but my eyes kept drifting to the bench. My hands were useless, stiff and unsure, and the room felt hollow without sound. It wasn't music I was missing, and I knew that. By noon, I stepped out to make tea, half hoping the hallway would be empty, but he was already there, leaning against the radiator with his arms crossed and eyes pinned to the floor. He looked up slowly as I passed. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the lounge and filled the kettle with more force than necessary, waiting for him to follow. He didn't. When I returned, he was still in the same place. "She hasn't spoken to me since yesterday," he said quietly without looking. "But she left something on the table this morning." He pulled a phone from his pocket, tapped twice, and held it up toward me. The screen displayed a file name. Untitled, voice recording, 6 minutes. The timestamp was from the day before. I don't know how she got it, he added, but she heard us. He didn't mean the kiss. He meant the things I'd said. The way my voice had changed. The tone that made it obvious I wasn't teaching anymore. My breath caught before I even heard it. She recorded us? He nodded. By accident, maybe. I don't know, but she played it back. I could tell. And I don't think she plans to keep it to herself. I took the phone from him carefully, like it might shatter. I didn't press play. I just held it. The screen dimmed after a few seconds, but I kept staring, wondering how 6 minutes could carry the power to unravel everything I'd built. After a long pause, he said, I told her it was nothing, that it wasn't what it sounded like. He laughed once. Short, dry. But it was, wasn't it? I didn't answer. That afternoon, the girl skipped her chamber rehearsal. Word spread quickly. Not because anyone said her name, but because these things always echo in institutions like this. I overheard 2 students whispering in the hall. She found something out. No, she's just sick. You think she's crying over a grade? I shut my door before I could hear more. I received an email around 3. It was from the head of the faculty. Short, neutral, but the subtext was unmistakable. There has been a concern raised informally regarding conduct during your sessions. Please make time to meet this week. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a full minute before I closed the message without replying. I would reply tomorrow, or the next day, or maybe never. By early evening, I needed to leave the building. I gathered my things slowly, hoping the corridor would be empty again. But just as I stepped out, I saw her at the far end, sitting on the bench outside the recital room, her hands in her lap, a notebook open but untouched. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. I hesitated for a second, then kept walking. I took the long route home again, the same streets I'd walked the night before, only this time I didn't stop for tea or groceries or anything at all. I just moved through the city like a shadow. The noise of traffic and footsteps made everything inside me feel quieter but not calmer. And when I finally stepped into my apartment and turned on the light, I let myself cry. Not because I was caught, but because I knew I deserved to be. That's the thing no one ever tells you about shame. It isn't loud. It settles in slowly, like dusk, soft and undeniable. It doesn't arrive when you make the mistake. It arrives later, when you realize you did it for reasons that don't hold up under real light. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to a recording that wasn't mine, playing it over and over in my head, even though I never pressed play. I knew exactly which moment she must have captured. The silence after the kiss, the way I'd whispered his name, the sound of the bench moving slightly under us, the pitch of my voice when I said, "You make me feel alive again." I didn't remember saying it until I imagined her hearing it. I sat up in the dark and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for days. What if this isn't about music at all? The next morning, my fingers hovered over the keyboard again. This time I opened a blank message to the faculty head. I typed, "I'm available Wednesday after 2. Then I deleted it. Then I typed it again. Then I sent it. And just like that, something in me conceded. He came by that afternoon. I didn't invite him. He simply showed up. I opened the door without thinking, still in my rehearsal clothes, hair tied back, face bare. He looked at me and said, "She's going to send it." I nodded. I'd already guessed. "She doesn't want to destroy you," he added after a moment. "But she does want people to know." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, trying to breathe steadily. "Then they will," I said. "She's not wrong." "She's hurt," he said. "So am I." We stood in silence for a while, not looking at each other. Then he said, "What now?" I didn't know how to answer. I still don't. I hadn't seen him in 5 days. Not at the studio, not in the halls, not even in the cafe where I used to catch glimpses of him hunched over a mug like he was trying to disappear into it. His absence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Like a missing key in a scale you can't unhear once you notice it's gone. The university hadn't contacted me again. Not yet. I suppose they were waiting for something formal, something irrefutable. A voice file. A name. Maybe they already had it. Maybe they were just watching to see what I'd do. I didn't go to the piano anymore. Not even to check the bench. Not even to turn a page in a score. I walked the length of the studio like a stranger in someone else's life, stepping over memories I had no permission to touch. It felt like being erased in slow motion. Then late one afternoon, I heard it. The faint hum of a violin string from behind the closed door of the recital room. The sound barely carried, but it was unmistakable. He was there, alone. I paused just outside, my hand on the doorknob, breathing in the last few bars like they might give me some kind of answer. Then I pushed the door open and stepped inside. He didn't look surprised. He was sitting on the bench, bow resting lightly in his right hand, the sheet music beside him unopened. The silence between us felt shaped by everything that had gone unsaid. I closed the door behind me and stood still. The air was dense but quiet, like a held breath that wouldn't release. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. I almost didn't. I wanted to say goodbye. I moved slowly toward him, each step heavy with the weight of what I'd carried all week. "Where are you going?" "I'm transferring." His voice was steady, but something in it cracked slightly around the edges. "It's already approved. New city, new faculty, no history." No history. That phrase struck something in me I didn't know I'd been holding. As if our story, flawed, fractured, unfinished, could be discarded like a broken chair. I looked at him, trying to find the anger I thought I should feel, but there was nothing sharp left in me. Only quiet. Only regret. I sat beside him on the bench. Not too close, but not far enough to feel honest. "So this is it?" I said. He turned toward me, one hand resting lightly on the piano lid. "I still think about the day you kissed me." "It was a mistake," I said, though even now I wasn't sure if I believed that. "You said you felt alive again." I closed my eyes briefly, trying to recall the exact shape of that moment. The warmth. The risk. The echo of her footsteps outside the door. "I did," I said, "but that doesn't mean it was right." He nodded. "I know." For a moment we sat in silence, listening to the faint buzz of a fluorescent light overhead. Then he reached toward the lid and opened the piano gently, pressing one key, then another, like he was trying to remember a language we used to share. I watched his fingers move and thought, do I still recognize myself in the way he looks at me? "I think we broke each other," I said. Maybe we were already broken. The words came so softly I wasn't sure I was meant to hear them. I looked over at him, eyes darker now than I remembered, and asked the question that had been building inside me for days. "Why did you come to me in the first place?" He didn't answer right away. He shifted, placed his violin down gently on the floor, and folded his hands in his lap. "Because I thought you saw me," he said. "Not as a student, not as someone's boyfriend. Just me." He turned toward me then, really turned, and I saw something behind his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not desire, not even sadness, but something softer and harder at once. Resolution. "I did see you," I said. "That's the problem." He nodded. "I know." The space between us didn't feel charged anymore. It felt hollow. He reached over and touched my hand. Not possessively, not even affectionately. Just lightly. Briefly. A gesture of farewell. I held it for a second, then let go. There's no crescendo in real life. No perfect diminuendo to end a chapter. Just a quiet folding in. A soft retreat. He stood first. I didn't follow. He picked up his case, slung the strap over his shoulder, and walked toward the door without looking back. But just before leaving, he paused. "If it had been another time," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "would you have chosen me?" I looked at him, really looked, and felt the full weight of the life we didn't live. "No," I said, "but I would have remembered you." He nodded once, then stepped through the door. "And to you, yes, you, sitting there wondering how this ends, I'll tell you the truth. There's no clean ending, no moral clarity, just a memory that plays itself over in quiet rooms long after the music stops." The hall was smaller than I remembered it, or maybe I'd just grown used to silence. The rows of seats stretched out in calm, symmetrical lines, and the low yellow lights along the aisles gave everything a soft, dusky glow. I stood backstage with my hands in my coat pockets, listening to the quiet murmurs of the small audience arriving. Colleagues, students, a few familiar names I hadn't seen in months. No cameras, no press. Just a short solo recital that had been scheduled before any of this happened and now hung in the air like an afterthought. I thought about canceling. 3 times. Once after I received the message confirming his transfer. Once after the dean asked, gently but clearly, if I needed time to reflect. And once again, just the night before, when I stood in the kitchen holding my old program binder and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd played for someone who wasn't in love with the idea of me. But I showed up. Because there are things you do even when you don't know why anymore. They announced me without ceremony. I stepped onto the stage in a black dress I'd worn too many times, shoes that didn't quite fit the way they used to, and hair pinned back like I had something to prove. I sat at the bench and exhaled slowly, letting the air leave my chest before I dared to lift my hands. The opening notes were soft, deliberate. Not because I wanted them to be, but because I couldn't force them to be anything else. My fingers were steady, but not confident. The space around each phrase felt hesitant, as if the room were waiting for me to falter. I played through it anyway. Somewhere near the midpoint, I felt my breath catch. Not because of a mistake, but because I saw him, sitting quietly in the 3rd row from the back, alone. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd left. He had said goodbye. But there he was, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded in his lap, watching with the kind of stillness that burns. I almost stopped, just for a second. But instead, I played on, letting the music push through the ache, through the thrum in my throat, through the part of me that wanted to close the lid and walk away for good. The final chord lingered longer than it should have. I released the pedal slowly, then removed my hands from the keys like they belonged to someone else. No one applauded right away. It took a second, a beat. Then it came. A gentle wave, not wild, not grand, just enough to make the moment feel real. I stood, nodded once, and left the stage. Backstage was quiet. Someone handed me a bottle of water. Someone else said something kind I didn't fully hear. I smiled politely, thanked them, and stepped into the dressing room to be alone. I needed a few minutes without faces, without sound, without expectation, The room was dim, the mirror unflattering, the light too harsh on the side. I sat slowly, placed the water bottle on the floor, and reached for the envelope someone had left on the table with my name scrawled across the front. I didn't recognize the handwriting. I thought it might be from the faculty office. But when I opened it, I found a short, careful note. Only 2 lines. "You sound like yourself again, but I can't stay to hear the rest." No name, no signature. Just the echo of what had already ended. I placed the note in my lap and stared at it, waiting for something inside me to shift. It didn't. Not right away. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closing briefly, and for the first time in weeks, I let the silence be complete. No rehearsals, no explanations, no apologies. Just the soft sound of fabric brushing against skin and the distant thrum of chairs being pushed back into place as the audience filed out. I reached for my earrings, unclipped one, then the other, and set them beside the note. My hand brushed the envelope a second time. There was a part of me that wanted to rip it in two, make it final, clean, but I didn't. I folded it once, placed it carefully inside my coat pocket, and stood. I turned off the light before I left the room. Outside, the sky had darkened into a late spring dusk. I walked home through the side streets, past the old bookstore with the broken awning, past the cafe where we used to sit before anyone knew. My shoes clicked gently against the pavement. I didn't rush. When I reached the apartment, I didn't turn on the music. I didn't open the piano. I simply sat on the edge of the couch, coat still on, and stared at the place where sunlight used to land every morning when I practiced. The floor was bare now. No scores. No spilled tea. No motion. Just space. There's no moral to any of this. No lesson to hold up like a mirror. Only the truth of a life that shifted when no one was supposed to be watching, and the sound it made when it broke. I'll wake up tomorrow. I'll teach again. Eventually. I'll answer the emails, return the scores, mark the attendance sheets. But I will not forget the way his hand felt when it left mine, or the way he looked at me from the back row, like he was seeing something that could never be heard again. I didn't lose him. That's not quite right. What I lost was a part of myself I can't return to. And in the end, I think that's what hurt most.